Nice to take refuge after a busy day, huh? Yeah, we're lost on me how fortunate we are that these teachings are still here. Tonight's sutta, pardon?
Teacher teaching them.
Yeah, well, I learned from the teacher. I studied that. That was important. We were talking a little bit about this earlier. So, tonight's sutta is called the Arahant Sutta. Arahant means one who has awakened through developing the Buddha's Dhamma. The Buddha never made a distinction between himself and others that would awaken, except that he referred to himself often as the Tathagata, which literally means one who has gone forth. What he's referring to is that he's the one who left the home life palace and went forth seeking understanding, and another way that he described himself, he became a rightly self-awakened one. And the only distinction he makes then is he's the guy that figured it out, and anyone else who's interested can do exactly the same thing, meaning become a rightly self-awakened one. And that's even a directional phrase, meaning that this is something that we develop as individuals. It's not something that's bestowed on us or granted us based on some kind of nebulous merit or just because we're wonderful folks. You got to work for it. But the Buddha also taught that any human being who engaged with his Dhamma could and would awaken. In other words, it's not something that's beyond an ordinary human being's capabilities. He taught a Dhamma that is for human beings to awaken in this lifetime. This short sutta really delivers an entire Dhamma teaching, but we need to know the context. The Buddha awakened to dependent origination, which states from ignorance of Four Noble Truths, all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing unsatisfactory experiences arise. Again, one of the most misunderstood and misapplied teachings, but it's very simple and direct. And so his very first teaching was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where he established the Four Noble Truths as the framework and context and purpose of his Dhamma. And everything the Buddha would teach for the next 45 years of his teaching career was taught in the context of dependent origination and Four Noble Truths. And it's important to remember that, or even a simple sutta like this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think that I'm going to read through the sutta and then go back and comment on different section. It's really line by line. There's a complete Dhamma teaching here. The Buddha's words from the Arahant Sutta. And when one has seen the five clinging aggregates as they really are, the arising and the passing away, understanding the attraction and the distraction, seeing the arising of desire and the continued delusion, and being delivered from the five clinging aggregates, this one is released from clinging. All defilements are destroyed. What must be done has been done. Perfection is attained. The burden has been put down. The highest goal attained. This one is liberated by perfect insight. When you understand this sutta in the right context, it's very hard to understand how anybody could become distracted from the Eightfold Path, because it speaks very clearly to what must be done. Beginning with and when one has seen the five clinging aggregates as they really are. What that's describing is how the Buddha described an awakened human being from the point of view of right view. Meaning right view, awakened right view, is someone who has a profound and penetrative understanding of the nature of suffering. The five clinging aggregates are simply the description given to the ongoing personal experience of suffering. And as we know from dependent origination, that suffering arises from ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So it would make sense that as we develop understanding of Four Noble Truths, we're diminishing the ongoing effect of ignorance and the ongoing effect of walking around as five clinging aggregates. So I need to describe what that is. The five clinging aggregates are form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and consciousness. And that's consciousness meaning ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And if we look at ourselves somewhat dispassionately, we can clearly see that it is through these five clinging aggregates that we describe ourselves to ourselves and describe ourselves to the outside world. All of us see ourselves as a physical form. And I would bet that a great majority of people are somewhat disappointed in their form. They want to be taller, shorter, thinner, fatter, whatever it might be. That's the beginning of ignorance, isn't it? Because here we are. This is what we are. An ultimate aspect of the Dhamma is that moment by moment, we accept who we are in relation to the world around us as it is occurring. And the profound wisdom is because it's what's occurring. The next clinging aggregate is feelings. And how many of us describe ourselves by how we're feeling? I'm having a good day. I'm having a bad day. You got me upset. That person makes me feel wonderful. Or even as we start becoming self-reflective and recognizing that some of our thoughts are hurtful towards ourselves. But those are reflective of feelings. And we're using feelings to describe ourselves. And then perceptions is the next thing. A perception is something that is formed from a misunderstanding of who we are in relation to the world, usually based on reaction to feelings. But another aspect of perceptions is the group perception that we all fall into. In other words, we tend to believe things that are reflected by, first, our family group. That may change after we grow up and leave the family, but often that's the case. And then by our associations, the people we hang around with will greatly influence our perceptions. And once a perception becomes a hardened view, it's now a fabrication. Now remember that dependent origination starts with ignorance as a requisite condition, a required condition, comes fabrication. It's the first thing that follows from ignorance. Ignorance is required to form these fabrications, which are hardened views of who we are in relation to the world around us, but rooted in ignorance of the way things truly are. The Buddha would describe that as anatta. Your views of yourself do not accurately describe a self. Let go of the views. They're not a self. That fifth aggregate of consciousness simply means ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So anything that is felt or thought of or perceived leading to development of a fabrication is through this veil of ignorance or through the filter of ignorance. And so it can only reaffirm ignorance, which is exactly what all the distractions in the world do. Excuse me. I think one of the most, I don't know if I use the word profound understanding, and I don't think I would have gotten it to this extent if I wasn't fortunate to have this seat, is the incredibly subtle but very powerful strategies almost all human beings employ to continue to ignore their own ignorance. And we become so enamored with those strategies. This sutta really speaks directly to that. That unless we had the framework of the Eightfold Path, there'd be no way that we could discern what is leading me, what is further distraction, what will only continue ignorance, and what will lead me to eventually becoming rightly self-awakened, as the Buddha taught. So the Buddha's teaching here very quickly and directly, we must understand the five clinging aggregates, which is saying we must understand the nature of suffering. Because the five clinging aggregates describe the ongoing personal experience of suffering. And then he gets right to the point of what this very specific insight that the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught insight not in a generalized way, not that we should gain insight into what it's like to wash a dish or eat a grape. These are all things that people tend to practice as Buddhists practice. It's good to be mindful no matter what we're doing, but the mindfulness that the Buddha teaches is rooted in gaining insight into the three marks of existence: the impermanence of all things, the not self characteristic, and the resulting suffering that comes from misunderstanding and misapplying and overemphasizing the first two. So, and when one has seen the five clinging aggregates as they really are, the arising and the passing away, it's pointing directly to impermanence. As we develop a more well-concentrated mind, we can see this occur within ourselves, the arising and the passing away of the aggregates, beginning with the first one. Form, we all know that our form has changed radically from the day we're born until whoever we are now. But we also know that each and every moment, the human body sloughs off millions of cells and regenerates millions of cells. In other words, even the physical form that we tend to think is a permanent vehicle is always in a constant state of becoming. It's changing all the time. It's necessary to maintain human life, as a matter of fact. our feelings change from one moment to the next. Something that may have made us feel wonderful in the past might prove to be disappointing in the future. Our perceptions are constantly changed, mostly by who and what we're associated with. But that's a key to developing understanding too. If we associate with a true Dhamma practice like the Buddha taught, our perceptions about who we are in relation to the world will start to change. And so we'll start recognizing fabrications and letting them go, the impermanent nature of fabrications. And ultimately we realize, but for some people very quickly in meditation, we recognize the impermanence of every thought we had. That simple act that we do in Shamatha-Vipassana meditation, to recognize that we're caught up in our thoughts and come back to the sensation of breathing, is a direct teaching and training on impermanence, isn't it? And it's ultimately the most profound training we get, because then we realize that every one of our thoughts is as impermanent as anything else, and they have as much meaning as any other impermanent object, which, as the Buddha would describe, is like foam on the ocean. Continue with this. Understanding the attraction and the distraction, seeing the arising of desire and the continued delusion, and being delivered from the 5 clinging aggregates, being delivered from suffering, being delivered from our views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, is the ultimate goal of the Dhamma. One who has done this, I'm just putting that little paraphrase in there, this one is released from clinging. What is the ultimate clinging? It's not clinging to objects so much, although that's usually what we recognize at first. Ultimately, it's clinging to views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And that's what proves to be most distracting away from the Dhamma, because we come up against views that we simply will not let go of. And it might be because we're associated with different types of spiritual practices, or it might just be views that don't coincide with right view, right speech, and right action. But we're not able to finally come to grips with letting go of all views rooted in ignorance. But when we do, this one is released from clinging. All defilements are destroyed. What are the defilements? Greed, aversion, and deluded thinking. Every human being carries that if they're not awakened. All defilements are destroyed. This is, to me, the most important line for every one of us to remember, because it speaks directly to the third noble truth, that cessation of individual contributions to suffering is possible. What must be done has been done. What does the Buddha say must be done? The only thing he ever said is what must be done is to develop the Eightfold Path. He never taught anything else as something that must be done. But in fact, the only thing that he ever taught was just that. What must be done has been done. Perfection is attained. The burden has been put down. What is the burden? The burden is this wrong view of self. And you could also say that burden is the 3 marks of existence, or the 3 defilements. The burden has been put down. The highest goal attained. This one is liberated by perfect insight. That's the end of the sutta and the end of my talk. What remarkable sutta, isn't it? And remember that last line, perfect insight, is insight into the 3 marks of existence. So any questions about this? We'll just go around the room because there's only 2 of us here. Kevin, good to see you.
Great to see you, John. Nice to be here with you, Frank. I really like that you're giving this talk this week after the auspicious day talk that you gave the other day.
That's right.
Because I just find this, I think Frank said this before, but it's really freeing, to be able to, like he's speaking about in this sutta, to put down those views of self and to have a calm mind when life is occurring. And it really is freeing, and it sort of points as it's all being flushed out in the sutta, but that's enough. Having that is enough. Putting down those wrong views and working towards right view, and seeing that interaction moment by moment of these 3 marks, and how our thoughts can get away from us if we're not really maintaining that concentration. So go forth every day on our mats and sitting and cushions, I guess. And it's really, really nice to have that context and hear this talk again. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your comments and for being here. It is, you hear me say it often, it's a very simple Dhamma practice, it does not mean that it's easy, but really it's the ease comes from right intention and continued right effort. And all that it really takes is continued right effort. We do what we can. And eventually we recognize all views that are rooted in ignorance, and we simply let them go. And we develop what the Buddha described, again, in completely non-mystical, non-magical, unambiguous terms. We develop a mind that rests in equanimity. And for many people, that would seem like, I don't even, why would I even want that? But that's what we all really want, is to find a way to develop what we now know is a true refuge, but within this chaotic world, a place that we feel safe and satisfied. When our minds are objectified and we're identified outside of our bodies, we're never satisfied because we're attaching ourselves to impermanent objects, events, views, and ideas. It just can't work. Thank you. Frank, good to see you tonight.
Good to be here tonight. Good to see you, Kevin, Don. It's a nice paragraph to kind of carry with you, to kind of like check yourself throughout the day. There's a lot of reading in studying all these suttas, but this, like you said, kind of sums everything up pretty good. I can read it in 30 seconds and kind of refocus myself. There had a lot of connections with the arising and passing away, understanding the attraction and the distraction, seeing the arising of desire and the continued delusion. Like, that really speaks volume to me when just talking about something that Lauren said the other day, when your mind is disturbed, you're usually in wrong view.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's pretty profound, because it's when I'm in that wrong view that I'm really affected by the arising and the distraction.
Yeah.
And when I recognize that I'm in wrong view, it kind of creates a little bit of space where I could see the passing away and the distraction passing away. And it's at that moment that I realized that what was experiencing the distraction, the pain, the dukkha, was the ego personality, was the 5 clinging aggregates. And I realized that in those moments when I'm like in that distraction, distracted with the dukkha, caught up in it, little space, that just lost my train of thought. That I was just talking about the 5 clinging aggregates. It's like when I realize that I'm in that suffering, that I'm in the wrong view, and it's just an easy check for me. When your mind is disturbed, you're in wrong view. Abandon wrong view and get into right view. And it's kind of interesting how the defilements also go with the wrong view, because when I'm in the wrong view, I can feel the ill will come up. I can feel that the anger and the delusion. I'm not so greedy, but I guess I could be in that passions of desire, either for it or not for it. Anyway, all I got.
That's a lot. Thank you, Frank. Yeah, I mean, another greed is a rather extreme or harsh word. Another word that really means the same thing as craving or desire, which ultimately comes down in relation to wrong view, is wanting anything that has occurred to be different than it is, including ourselves. That's mind that's resting in equanimity doesn't discern that, doesn't need things to be different than it is. But you also described right view as it relates directly to this sutta, that it is a developed right view that understands the 5 clinging aggregates and the arising and the passing away of the aggregates, and understands the delusion that is continued from desire. It's rooted into and it's that feedback loop too that the Buddha described in the Gara Sutta. From our desire, we think we need more to keep ourselves happy or safe or protected, and we get stuck in it. Even once we get something that we desire, it's to a self-referential ego self, it's never enough. It can never satisfy an ego self. And we just continue to get caught up in that. And so this simple and direct sutta, you're right to use it that way, to read it and say, well, yeah, this relates to the three marks of existence. Let me look at that. It could be a pointer to other things to develop as far as a Dhamma. It's just a remarkable sutta, which is why I come back to it at least once a year, maybe twice a year. Any other? Yeah, Frank.
You know, like I think about that feedback loop a lot because I feel like I get caught in that as well. And it's from that contact of the five physical senses, which you call the six sense base,
Yep.
that this ego personality arises and craving and clinging and becoming is like starting to establish. And then I go right back to like that name and form, and fabrications are, like I heard you say earlier, that fabrications are usually what you think about yourself. And I don't know if that's what you said or if that's what you meant, but a lot of times I get mental fabrications about, like, that's where judgment comes up on external judgments on someone else or a situation like that. And I feel like I'm caught in that loop of consciousness, like that five physical senses, craving, becoming, and I'm starting to recognize it. And for me, it kind of feels painful when I'm caught in it.
It is,
And then I feel really, like, not so much isolated, but I'm like, I just feel unique when I'm in that situation. Like nobody knows what I'm feeling right now. Nobody understands this. You know, that's coming from the ego. You know.
Yeah.
So that happens a lot with my wife.
Yeah, and ultimately nobody else can really understand what you're feeling, and they can't, because they're grasping at something that's like foam on the ocean too. You know, but and again, when we get into more intimate relationships, the dynamic changes a little bit, and it's not uncommon or even wrong to expect another person to have a little bit of understanding for you. You know, that's just human relationships. We get so caught up in going back to the Buddha's description and what you were talking about, getting caught up in that feedback loop. The Buddha describes it so clearly that from name and form, feeding back on consciousness. And then he says, and from consciousness is feeding back on name and form is simply a self-referential view that we're holding. And we get stuck in this self-referential view, feeding back on the thoughts that created the self-referential view in the first place. That's the feedback loop. And upon the Buddha's awakening, this is his real brilliant. And I wish I was there, because I bet you this was the aha moment when he realized that. And then how do I teach this? How can I explain to other people whose minds are stuck in a feedback loop? Meaning, you can't see out of it. Another word for that feedback loop is being rooted in ignorance. And so upon his awakening, he sat in meditation off and on for a couple more weeks, trying to decide if it was even possible to teach what he now understood, knowing that common human problem to ignore our own ignorance. And that's where he developed an eightfold path, which is the framework for recognizing and ultimately abandoning all wrong views rooted in ignorance. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant in its simplicity, but it's also brilliant in its application, meaning that anybody who develops this wholeheartedly can and will awaken. And one of the things that we're so fortunate about here is we get to see each other doing this and actually developing the Dhamma, not some concept, and not, I did this for 30 minutes yesterday and I feel so wonderful today. We're actually changing. We're looking at our views. We're recognizing what is rooted in ignorance, and we're letting them go. We're developing a calm and peaceful mind. It's remarkable. Any other questions or comments before we finish? A really good class. So, and a nice group of folks joined us. If anybody was looking for the chat window, I disabled it because I think that might have been what was causing a conflict with the audio recording. I'm not sure, but that's something I gathered. Hopefully we can fix that, and we'll get the chat window back working again. We'll finish with metta as we always do. So again, find your relaxed meditation posture. And gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. Before I start, I just want to say, people online, our next retreat, our fall retreat, starts a week from tonight. There's info on the website. There will be a Tuesday class and a Wednesday talk next week. There will not be a Thursday or Saturday class next week. Okay. The Buddha's words on Metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight.
Thanks.
Peace.